Hello, this is Jed Morgan and I'm about to present the 10th in a series of WebExes for the installation and configuration of the IQPBX platform. And in this WebEx we're going to be covering what is probably the most important WebEx of them all, and it's to do with security. Unfortunately, in this day and age we are abound with hackers and who subject us to toll fraud on a massive scale. Comes to billions of pounds a year. It's a very serious thing, and it's very important that we get security right, and it all begins with the IT infrastructure on your customer's site. So your first line of defense is your customer's IT department, who set up security both on routers, they install firewalls, and they set up protection rules to cover their LAN infrastructure. But majority of the time they don't protect for SIP attacks, and this is very important with the IQPBX because we use SIP connections for trunks, SIP connections for remote extensions, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the security assets we have within the IQPBX so we can help protect the system from attacks. So we've already covered the first of these in one of the first WebExes, where we looked at on the extension parameters. So parameters for the extension, the optional settings here, we can set up permitted IP addresses, and when you enable the IP restriction, it means that the IP addresses listed here will be the only IP addresses allowed to log on with the identification of this extension, with this extension's credentials. These are the only IP addresses that will be able to log on. For example, if this was extension 205, they would be the only IP addresses to log on as 205. First step, basic step for extension security, a slide on attack from a hacker. It's an example, a basic example. They send out requests and ping requests on 5060, and if they get a reply, then they hit the system, or they hit that IP address with hundreds of packets, and also sending in password requests. So they hit the system constantly until they get the password right, and they're in. And one other thing is, while they're hitting the system with all these packets, it does affect the stability of the system. So a troubleshooting tip is, if you're getting a system that's resetting itself, check in the IP blacklist, which we'll come to shortly, and see if you've got any IP addresses in the blacklist, because that's a clue that the system's being hit constantly and it overloads the processor and the system resets itself. So, little troubleshooting tip. So we're saying that the hacker attempts to send the SIP packets through the firewall. They get through the firewall, and the system sees it's being attacked by a certain IP address, sending so many packets over a certain time period. Then it goes into it will drop the connection and put that IP address into a blacklist automatically. Example of a screenshot of a firewall. So if we look on here, this is where you check enable firewall, and does a restart on the system, and the firewall will indicate as being started. Looking down here is where we create the rules, common rules, defense rules, and here there is an IP blacklist. This is where we check to see if we've been attacked by any attackers, and down at the bottom is where we select the option to drop all, and we can even disable ping on the system. But I'll go into that and I'll demonstrate that on a live system and show you the settings, etc. So first of all, when we're creating a firewall, the first thing we do, as in when any engineer visits a site, the first thing you do is create a new backup. So you create a backup of the current configuration, so we've always got a record we can go back to and put a config back in. Okay, so that's the end of the slideshow. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we'll create a connection to the system, and we'll look at these examples of firewall rules and what we can do within the system. So I'm going to log on to the system, and okay, so over here straight away is the firewall menu in network settings. In the firewall, it'll probably kick us out, so we'll have to re-log in. No, we're okay. So as I said, enable firewall. Firewall has successfully started when you've done a reboot. So the first thing to do is enable firewall and then create the rules. So in here, give a name for the rule and a description of what it will do. Which protocol are you going to create the rule for, TCP, UDP or both? Which ports are we going to protect? Which ports are we going to insert in the firewall? Could be 1.655.1 to 655.35. Can be 50.60 to 50.65. The relevant IP address, subnet. You could even create a rule for a MAC address, and the action for this rule would be to drop the connection, accept it, allow it through, or ignore. We tend to create rules to accept, but we have options to drop or ignore. Save the rule, and it creates the list of rules for you. These are the ones we've created on our system as examples. So for example, we want to allow a remote connection from an external IP address of 81.137.245.81. We only want it to be that MAC address, so the subnet is all 255.255.255.255. Protocol is both, and the port we want to accept that from, or we want to accept the port on that IP address, is 8022. In this case, this is our secure shell, our SSH. We accept the connection and we save the rule. So once that's saved, it joins the list of saved rules. We can also, further down, we can create defense rules for ports. So we add a rule. Just waiting for a connection. And we can also add a rule for blacklists. I'm going to see if my blacklist screen will open. There we are. We've been logged out, so we need to log back in. Having logged back in, open the box, add a defense rule, and this is where we can actually insert the port number, which protocol we want to include in the defense rule, the rate of packets we'll accept within a certain time period, or TCP connections for example. So here for this example would be port 8022, the protocol's TCP. 10 TCP connections within a minute is acceptable, and the 11th will be refused directly. We can create the defense rules. We can add a rule for we can add IP addresses to the blacklist, and if we look in this option here, as I mentioned before, if the system was being attacked and it started to reset itself randomly, this is the place where you would look, and if you were to see a whole host of IP addresses coming down this page, then you'd see that the system is being attacked constantly, and you would have to create further rules, look at the IP address, etc., further rules, and either effect changes further at the front end by the IT department and their firewall and router protection, etc., and create further rules within this firewall. So firewall's covered, rules generated, do a reboot on the system, enable the firewall, and you'll be protected. One note to make is that you must even create, so if we look at the rules, internal access, local remote access, we must generate rules for these. We must generate these two rules. There is a document in the download when I indicated there was a link in the earlier WebEx to a download to the IQPBX's here zip file, and one of the documents in there is regarding security. So this is a very important document and well worth a read. I'm not going to read it out verbatim, but if we look further down the document, as it indicates there in this sentence here, we must pay attention to the security of the IQPBX. SIP attacks are becoming more and more common. So you can see how they're trying to get in, and if we look further down, we look at the rules we can generate. So it goes through each of the rules I've just gone through. Create a rule for the local network, internal devices, your service PC or your service machine, so that each time you try and log on locally, the system doesn't think it's being attacked and you get the bad gateway message. There's an error that comes up quite frequently called bad gateway message and logs you out. You won't be allowed to log on the system. It's because the system thinks it's being attacked, so all you do is create a rule in your firewall to say my local PC or my service PC is fine, it's trusted, and you can connect every time. A little troubleshooting tip. So remote extensions here, title, allow remote extension IP or MAC address, so you can register with an IP address if you have a static IP address at the remote location. With the subnet covering ports 1 to 65535. Accept, save, and that's a remote extension accepted. Further one for remote extensions, that's your SSH. You must create a rule for SSH connection, secure shell connection. So basically follow these rules. There's one for SIP trunks. We must allow the SIP trunks. You create one for 5060 to 5065. The IP address of the host, the provider, subnet mask, accept, and that's the rule for the SIP trunks through the firewall. It states in here, remove the 3 default rates. So where we pointed out Blacklist before, you will have 3 default rules generated. Delete those 3, use the delete option, and just let the firewalls do their job. As I say, you can disable ping and then drop all. So once you've created that, don't forget you'll create a backup. So you'll save the options and reboot the system, and your firewall is active. So that's a very important document there. So that brings us to the end of the security WebEx. There'll be a further WebEx giving you an insight as to what's coming with IQPBX, and we'll do some diagnostics in the next WebEx that will aid you to find out if you have any issues, especially with SIP. Okay, also here I've just brought up this slide on the screen here just to indicate this download link to a lot of documentation that you'll see available to you when you download it, and I'll just indicate exactly what we've got in this download. So there are a lot of technical tips. There are IQPBX limitations. There'll be a pricing guide and pricing configurator as well. Sales PowerPoint, introductory letter or introductory notice. Yealink range indicates the range of Yealink phones. Some IQPBX questions, and a version of Xlite, which is a soft phone, soft SIP client that you can load onto a laptop or your service PC to check your connection to your system. It just works like a little phone, and it's PC based, so nice little tool, Xlite. Networking options for networking a couple of systems together. Basic function user guide, you can download that and print it off, maybe laminate them, give them out to your customers as your little cheat sheets, user guides. 2000 final manual, instructional installation manual, configuration help. Little bit on call logging, international or barring if you like. ISDN direct dialing outward, and direct outward dialing enables you to send non-geo numbers out to network. if dialed by an extension or a group. Some changes in the system, etc. Analog trunks. Just want to touch on the analog trunk document for a second. In the UK, we have different protocols that we have on our analog trunks. Since the days of meter pulses have gone, we use polarity reversal to free lines and send busy tones, etc. We also have hang up on polarity. So depending on what type of line you've ordered, if you're installing analog trunks and you connect them to the system and you find something like your phone disconnects or the call disconnects after 180 seconds or so, then you need to look at this document, as it indicates where you can make the changes that will sort that out and resolve the issue. There's a diagram of a couple of settings that you may need to change. Indicates there, if your call cuts off after approximately 180 seconds, then change this to no. I've also got this option here, this caller ID. In default this is set to yes, and if you haven't requested caller ID on your analog trunks, you'll find that the caller making the call into the system on the analog trunk will hear about 3 or 4 ringtones, 3 or 4 ring cycles before the phones actually start ringing in the office or where they're supposed to. This is because the system is looking for caller ID. If you set this to no, if you've not ordered caller ID, then the phone should ring straight away. They'll be okay. So we support caller ID on the analog trunks, and if you're having any issues on the analog trunks, please try one of these 3 settings that we have here, just indicated here. One of these 3 settings will work for us in the UK, so try each of them and you'll find a working solution. Okay, so just a tip on analog trunks. We can integrate with Link, Microsoft Link. We can integrate with that. We can integrate with Skype, and there are documents in here in this download that will tell you how it's done and how it works. We do support CTI integration and TAPI, and it's done by a third-party company called Extelsio, the letter X T-E-L-S-I-O, Extelsio, and if you just search on their website, you can get all the details on there. I will actually cover that off in a bit more detail in another WebEx. And 3 very important documents here. You can have a look if you're having trouble with SIP trunks or SIP issues. Here, look at the fault handling. Have you done this? Have you done that? Go through these documents. It's all there to help you in your installation and configuration. All that remains for me is to wish you the best of luck on installing IQPBX. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And the IQPBX team here at Nikon will offer support. Thank you very much indeed. I'll speak to you on the next one.